Hello, Alessandrina here, and today I'm going to talk about self-image, identity, and personality. And the intention with this video is to help you become aware in your relationship dynamics so that you can improve your relationship dynamics of parts of you that are operating from an idea of self, your self-image, an idea of identity, and who you believe yourself to be. So our self-image, our identity, our personality, who we believe ourselves to be, is very much a result of our conditioning, of what we've learned from interactions with family, with friends, with people in general in society, with our interactions with the collective consciousness, with the people around you, and with our surrounding. And so when we operate from who we've constructed, who we've imagined ourselves to be. So for instance, if we've learned that a good person does ... is kind, is caring, is loving, is attentionate, is always looking for ways to help others, etc., etc. Not that those things are not wonderful, just to say that any belief that we inherit through our conditioning, that is what makes a good person, for instance, and everyone wants to be a good person. So you can, for the most part, you can really say that whatever your identity is, your personality, your self-image is going to be a result of what you've learned to be what a good person is. And that for most of the time, you're going to try to operate in those ways consciously. And then subconsciously, there might be a lot of different programs running in your system that have different narratives, different motivations, that feel, different ways about different things that would then map to a different result. So to you not being a good person, not that there is such a thing as a good person or a bad person, simply that they are things that either are conducive and supportive of peace, of harmony, of joy, of love, of understanding and getting along, and other things not so much. So those things that are not in alignment with bringing that love, that harmony, that connection, that wellness, that joy in the relationship, sometimes we can look at those as, oh, those are bad. And so that's what's good, that's what's bad, that's what's right, that's what's wrong. So when we operate from dualistic perspectives, from having been conditioned into believing that there's a right way or a wrong way, or a good person or a bad person, then we're going to have internalized that. Even if intellectually we understand that to be the case, we can still, at the level of our lower energy centers, have those recordings, and when we do something, we can feel like, oh, that was bad or that was wrong, instead of just, oh, I did this. What was my motivation? How did that come to be? So if we don't realize that we're operating in those ways, that is essentially something that is having an influence on how we feel about ourselves, then we might go from not realizing that we're doing that, we might go into self-judgment from, one part of us that feels we're a good person to another part of us that feels we're a bad person. And then we can operate in that way. And then that can also be invisible to us, meaning that as much as we can go into self-judgment and feel like we're a bad person in some ways, and feel shame or guilt, criticize ourselves, punish ourselves in some ways, we also have another narrative, another program running in our system of being a good person. And therefore, and this is what is very, very useful in relationship dynamics, realizing that we're operating from that identity of being a good person, and then everything that means. Oh, so I'm a good person, so I do this, I do that. And so then when someone comes to us and tells us, and relationships are a mirror, not to say that people can come to us and be projecting onto us their own patterns or their own pain or their own recordings from the past in other prior relationships with their parents or siblings or another partner that they've had. That said, oftentimes, because relationships are a mirror, when someone comes to us and say, you're doing this, or I feel pain when you do this, or and oftentimes the the delivery system is not perfect, and so the person can be in a state of judgment, in a state of pain, in a state of fear, in a state of blame, in a state of punishment, in a state of essentially not being able to deliver the information, the communication with equanimity, without attachment or aversion, in a peaceful way. So then we receive this, and it doesn't match with our identity, with our self-image, with our personality, with who we think we are. And so then we discard it. We don't want to hear it. We don't believe it. We're not aware of it. It's the unknown. We don't know what we don't know. So we don't know that we're actually doing that. So someone is telling us you're doing that, and we're looking at like who we are, who we think we are, and we're like, that cannot be. That is not me. That is not who I am, who I believe myself to be. We don't know that. We think that who we are is who we believe ourselves to be. It's not really who we are, which is why relationships are wonderful, because they're a mirror. They give us the opportunity, subtracting the judgment or the blame from the feedback, to actually say, how am I doing that? So there's a wonderful video with Krishnamurti, there are many, and where someone essentially says, Krishnamurti, you're in a rut. And Krishnamurti looks and ponders, and instead of rejecting, which is the tendency, if we look at the self-image, if Krishnamurti had a self-image, an identity, and someone, whoever he thought he was, which he didn't, he would look at his list and say, that doesn't match, that's not who I am, I'm not in a rut, and he would reject it. So in relationship, we often do that. We reject the information that doesn't match our list, our map, our identity, our self-image. And when we do that, instead of inquiring, so Krishnamurti actually said, oh, let me inquire, am I in a rut? And if I am, how much am I in a rut? How am I in a rut? Why am I in a rut? What's the program, the conditioning, the belief, the pain, the fear that's leading me to be in a rut? So we don't do that. Not many people, not many beings have the capacity to actually have no self-image, no identity, no personality, and just say, okay, whatever is coming to me, whatever feedback, whatever process of reflection comes to me, I'm going to introspect on it, I'm going to explore it, I'm going to see if there's any validity to it, and then change if there is validity to it. So usually if someone tells us something in relationship dynamics, and sometimes there is, there are energies that are narcissistic that can be projective onto someone else, and that's not really happening. That said, that's not the majority of the time, meaning that when someone tells us something, they can always be, even if it's very minute, some truth. Again, if you subtract the judgment, if you subtract their fear, if you subtract their blame, their punishment, their anger, their frustration, whatever negative emotions and energy comes with the communication, then you can actually get to the truth. And so then you can explore, and you can actually get to that wonderful, not as an identity, that said, whatever you've put on that list of who you believe yourself to be, actually by taking this feedback and exploring, you can actually refine your process of getting there. Not from, so a self-image, identity, personality is a safety control strategy. It's a way of feeling safe in the world. So if we want to be good people, and we have a bunch of different beliefs of, what a good person is, then we're going to want to identify with that. And so if we release that, and if we say, well, I do intend to bring goodness into the world, which is different than being a good person, which is a static form. No one is a good person as static. Everyone is learning, everyone is growing, everyone is refining their process. And so if we let that go, and if someone gives us feedback, then we have the opportunity to bring goodness, to refine our process of bringing the qualities, the energies, the emotions, the embodiment of the things that are meaningful to us, and that can bring more joy, more peace, more harmony, more balance, more equanimity in the world. So that's a wonderful thing. So when we reflect, when someone gives us feedback, and we reflect on that feedback and we accept it. Accepting it doesn't mean that we agree with it. We accept it, we introspect on it, we understand what is being shared, how it's being shared, and again, subtracting the negativity, we start to look for it. And even if it's just 1% or 0.1%, whatever part of us might be operating in that way, now we gain the insight and the opportunity and the empowerment to actually change ourselves and to become who we are wanting to be, who we consciously have believed ourselves to be, and that we were not always, all of the time. And now, through that reflection, through that feedback, through that mirror, we now have the opportunity to become to become that energy, to embody that energy, to be in that energy, and to share that energy with our partner, which is a wonderful thing. And now imagine if both people, so you could say that that's a process of taking accountability, of self-awareness, self-reflection, self-refinement. And now imagine if both people, instead of rejecting, having their image and saying, this is who I am. And if you don't tell me that that's who I am through your mirror, then I will be angry, or I will blame you, or I will be unhappy. If instead of doing that, we are open to someone else, again, even if they're in a projective mode or in some ways, or even if they are in a blaming mode or a judgmental mode or punishing mode, we say, I'm going to open myself to their feedback. And I'm not going to, again, agree, I'm just going to accept and introspect and assess and evaluate within my own self, not from my ego, from a meditative state optimally, because if we're doing it from the ego, we're not going to see it, because we're going to see the self-image, we're going to see the identity, the personality. We're not going to see what is and what this person is pointing to. So if they're pointing to something and they're using words that don't match to our experience, again, we might reject it or not identify with it. If instead we accept it and we say, I'm going to explore that, I'm going to feel it out in meditation and ask myself, how am I doing that? So instead of saying, no, I'm not doing that, this is not who I am, how am I doing that? How could I be doing that? What are ways in which I am doing that? And without judgment. So forgiving ourselves if we are doing that and it doesn't match the self-image, now we're empowered to transform. Because if we judge it because we're not feeling safe with it, it's not part of our identity, of our personality, then what happens is that we can't work with it, we can't uncover it, we can't understand it, and therefore we can't resolve it. So by being open, by accepting, not agreeing, by accepting, being open, and then exploring through consciousness and asking, how am I doing that? If I am, how am I doing that? Now we can see it. And because we don't judge it, when we get to that point of forgiveness, for instance, doing the forgive and forget, if we realize that we have been doing that, or that we could be doing that preemptively, we forgive it. And then we say, oh, in this situation where I feel out of control, I feel unsafe, I feel maybe not enough, not good enough, I feel maybe judged, I feel maybe abandonable, rejected, not accepted. In that situation, I do that. I do have that pattern. It's just a pattern, right? It's not us. So we're just made up of patterns and parts until we become fully conscious. So if we then realize that, now we can map it. We can say, oh, so I am doing that. I have been doing that maybe 5% of the time or 10% of the time. And then we can say, well, what are my triggers? In what situation do I do that? Oh, okay. When someone talks to me in a certain way, when someone looks at me a certain way, when I haven't had enough sleep, when I eat a certain food, all the different triggers, environmental triggers that can bring about the pattern. And so then when we realize, now we can start working on the triggers, so like basically removing the triggers, and also having no aversion to the triggers, realizing, oh, in those situations, I'm going to remediate these different situations. And I'll be very aware that, if someone is judging me, for instance, I go into this pattern. And so now I'm going to forgive people who are, for instance, judgmental, so that then in those moments, because I remain conscious and I'm not in judgment of their judgment, then I can remain grounded and present and conscious and loving and caring, rather than going into a pattern, a reactive pattern. And then we can even map it to our parents' behaviors and our childhood, and other different circumstances in our lives that have conditioned us into the pattern. And so then we understand the pattern and we realize, oh, that's not me. It's not my identity, my self-image, my personality. It's just a pattern. It's just something I inherited, which makes it even easier to forgive, to accept, and therefore to dissolve and release. And you can do that, for instance, the tool, the forgive and forget technique, the marma, that comes from Ayurveda, from a tradition of Dr. Pankaj Naram and Smita Naram. This tradition has this marma of the forgive and forget, and it's very, very helpful in transmuting these energies and releasing them. And when we release the energy of the pattern, meaning that the energy is what holds the pattern in place, when we release that energy, we liberate the energy, for instance, with the forgive and forget, it's just one process of transmutation, then it just dissolves. And so when it dissolves, we don't go into the pattern anymore. And we're also not identified with our patterns. We realize, as we dismantle our patterns and we see that they're just a program, like a robot, when we realize that and we see that's not who we are, we're a soul, we are consciousness, we're not programs of, this is me, this is what I should do to be a good person. When we're not identified in those ways, then life gets better. Life gets better internally, and of course when life gets better internally, it gets better externally, and our relationships get better, we get along better, we have less conflict, and we're more open, and we're really more transparent and humble, and having a real dialogue and communication about how we feel, rather than identity, self-image, personality to identity, self-image, and personality saying, no, that's not who I am, and our partner saying, no, that's not who I am, and then not being able to resolve core issues in relationship. So I hope this is helpful and that you recognize the benefits of this process of really allowing yourself to be open to this kind of feedback and not be rigidly tied and identified with your identity, with your self-image, with your personality, so that you can actually refine your process and you can actually become the person that you want to be, not from a sense of identification and have to or should or belief or fear, simply through your own alignment with what is in your highest and best good, and the highest and best good of your relationships, and the harmony and the peace and the joy in your relationships. Sending you much love.